Welcome to Bite-Sized Bios. This is meant to be a mini-sode that will accompany HDTH. Every week, I will pick a person from history and dive into their lives. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Bite-Sized Bios, BSB. It is the mini-sode accompaniment to How Did That Happen? This week, we're going to talk about Benjamin Franklin, but before we get into that, we're going to go back to last week's episode, birthdays. Like I said, this is the mini-sode to go with it, so if there's anything that I missed, I always try to come back and add it in here. And I'll say there's one thing, when I finished the episode last week, and I sat back and I listened to it, and it was already published, and I was like, oh man, like I never really made the full connection to how the song Good Morning All, or Good Morning to All, really how they got the words for how it switched from that to Happy Birthday. I kind of weaved a path there, but when I thought about it, I was like, because I was like, how did it happen? So I looked it up. I have the answer for those of you who were just teetering on the edge this last few days. I'm sure there was like one of you. So basically, it goes back to when I said the rights for the song were actually sold to a company called the Chapel Music Group or whatever. So they released a songbook in 1927. Basically, and the song was called Number 16. And it was the Good Morning to All, right? But like, so they had the main lyrics that said Good Morning to All or Good Morning All or whatever, and then under that there were optional lyrics, and the optional lyrics were Happy Birthday. And so that is kind of what led to this to the words being applied to the melody. That's what when I finished the episode last week, I was just like, I don't think I made that connection. I said all this and I really didn't even tell you. I mean, I jumped a million years in the future without telling you how it started. But so that's why we do this, though. That is it. I'm glad that that the minisodes are here for that specific reason, because I would have never been able to go back and try to fix what I messed up. But yeah, so this week is Benjamin Franklin. We're gonna learn a lot about him. I learned a lot about him when I was looking all this stuff up, as as normal. I guess it's good that time goes on, because you don't realize, or the truth starts to come out. I guess you can say you find out more about these people than you did 20, 30 years ago in your social studies class. But yeah, there's not much I think I also want to say. I may have left out, I think, one of the things that's important in this already, that I just think is really cool about Benjamin Franklin, is the fact that he signed the Declaration of Independence, the U.S. Constitution, and the Treaty of Paris. And he, in fact, was the oldest person to sign the Constitution. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Everything else, I give you my version of what I think is important or interesting about Benjamin Franklin. I mean, how many different biographies can tell you about all the stuff he did in the Continental Congress? Cool. We're here to learn about the rest of his life. So yeah, as I normally do, without further ado, here is the episode. All right, so Benjamin Franklin is the topic today, and before we get too deep into him, I'll just read to you a quick little blurb about how Wikipedia feels about him. So they describe him as an American polymath who was an active writer, scientist, inventor, statesman, diplomat, printer, publisher, political philosopher, and so on. One of the leading intellectuals of his time. He was also one of the founding fathers, postmaster general, yada, 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 all that good stuff. So basically, I say all that to say he was a very accomplished man. I wanted to get that out there, because I'm not sure if I'm going to cover all of that in this, but I definitely want to give the man his due, because yeah, some of the stuff that I think that I found out is not exactly the Benjamin Franklin that I grew up with, but that's cool. That's kind of what we're here for. So, all of Benjamin Franklin's grandparents were born in England. It's kind of cool. His father, Josiah Franklin, he was also born there, but he immigrated to Boston in 1683. He was married in England before. He actually brought his first wife with him when they came over, but she died during childbirth. His father had 17 children in total. Ben was number 15, the last of the 10 sons to be born. And his father, Josiah, did a lot of things during his life, but in America, he made soaps and candles. I believe they said in England he would dye clothing, but when he got to America, they didn't have a need for that, so he had to find another job. So yeah, Ben Franklin was born on January the 17th, 1706, on Milk Street in Boston, Massachusetts. Pretty cool being born on Milk Street. He was baptized at the Old South Meeting House. I'm not throwing old on there. It's literally called the Old South Meeting House, which is exactly where his mother and father His mother, Abia Folger, and his father, Josiah Franklin, were married 17 years prior. Franklin attended the Boston Latin School, but did not graduate. He only went there for a couple years, and that school was actually the oldest existing, I think, public school in America. It's pretty interesting. Don't at me if I'm wrong, but definitely fact check. Let me know. Like I said, he did not graduate, but by 12, he was apprenticing with his brother. And I'll say, apprenticing. I've heard things like he was actually an indentured like servant, basically almost a slave to his brother. Like every dollar he had to work off a certain amount of money. He was like, I guess, like, I don't know, like a servant to his brother for like 9 years or something like that. And there was a certain amount of money he had to make and work off. So apprenticing to me is a little bit different, but that's what he was doing for a while. His brother owned a newspaper. Well, he started out working for a newspaper, and then later on made his own newspaper. And Ben Franklin would write for that paper. So he tried to get published in his brother's paper, but his brother was not really having it. So what he actually did, old Ben Franklin, he created a character named Miss Dogood. I think her first name was actually Silent, which is, I didn't even know that people were naming people that. But they accepted her work, right? And so after writing 14 articles, he was eventually found out, and his brother found out, and he was not really having it. So that was the end of that. Even during that time, he was an advocate for free speech. He's always been kind of, pushing that, basically. But when his brother was jailed for 3 weeks in 1722, he finally got his chance to actually, run the paper, and so he did that, and he did it pretty well. But his brother was not really feeling it, and he eventually left his apprenticeship without his brother's permission, and in doing so became a fugitive from his brother. This led him to move to Philadelphia, which is where he really kind of makes the beginning of his real name as kind of what we know for him to be as Ben Franklin. He forms the Junto, which was a group of like-minded artisans and tradesmen who hoped to improve themselves while they improved their community. And they also were very instrumental in creating, I think, one of the first public libraries, I believe, or it's a subscription library. I'm not sure if it's actually public, but I guess it was like a thing where you would all kind of pool your money and then have enough money to buy other books so that everybody could read, sort of thing. It's an interesting concept. I'm going to go ahead and skip to his time in Europe because, I mean, this guy, he did so much, and there's still a lot that I want to tell you, but I'm really trying to stick to the bite-sized bio of this thing. But when I really look at some of these, just like these behemoth characters in history, it's hard to just gloss over because people think that you'll have left something out or you didn't know this or something like that. But there's a lot going on in this man's life. He lives to be, I think, 84 years old, so he does a lot. But between 1757 and 1775, old Ben Franklin spent more than 15 years in Europe, with London being his home base for a large amount of time. But then it actually began to shift once the 13 colonies kind of made their feelings about independence known. Then he kind of started to hang out in France more often, and he was actually America's first diplomat. Yeah, interestingly enough, the first time he ever went, the reason he went to England the first time was it was to settle a dispute between the sons of William Penn and the Crown. So, like William Penn being the founder of Pennsylvania, and his sons, who had his land, they thought that because my dad founded this land, I shouldn't have to pay as much. I shouldn't be taxed at the same rate as the quote unquote common folk. And it was Ben Franklin's job to go over there and prove that they actually should be taxed the same amount. It was just an interesting little tidbit about why he was over there in the first place. I thought it was pretty interesting. Let's see later on. Let's see, and they talk about how famous he was over there in Europe, really in France. This was, and a lot of this was post the Revolutionary War. He basically became like a celebrity in there because he was a founding father of like the newest country out, and like we beat England, and so they would literally have like his face on like medallions, and he would be like painted on the side of buildings. It's pretty interesting when you really think about it in that perspective of you walking around like 1780s, Paris, and you turn a corner, and there might be just some huge painting of Ben Franklin just on the side of a wall. I don't know, but that's what he was. He did a lot in France that we're not going to cover, but yeah, we're going to get to his inventions, which I think should have their own podcast, and may even at some point get their own podcast, because I learned so much about the fact that when you're reading it, you're just like, he didn't make all this stuff. There's no way he made all this stuff, and you find out that he probably actually didn't make all this stuff. He made some of it. I'm not coming with like some crazy left field conspiracy. He definitely made some of this stuff. But when you look into it, and I heard some stories, which I will share with you right now. All right, so the first one is the idea of Poor Richard's Almanac. Basically, from what I saw on YouTube, and I will definitely have this will be posted on the website so you can see the video as well and see what I'm seeing. But he didn't even actually make that. He kind of he took like the business model idea from somebody who's already like running the game pretty well. He did this by basically slandering that family into non-existence, and so that family is called the Leeds family from New Jersey, and they have been publishing a Farmer's Almanac for like even like 20 years before Franklin was even born, right? And so, but when he saw them doing this, he was so entranced and enthralled in what they were doing. He was like, I have to do that for myself, but I can't just do it. They got the market all stood up. So what can I do? Since I run newspapers, I'll just start making these weird stories about this family, and people will start disliking them. I'll start saying that they worship Satan, right? And that maybe even the woman, the patriarch of the matriarch of the family, that maybe she gave birth to a demonic baby. Look it up. It's out there, right? And so this was enough for the family to actually fall out of favor, and for Franklin, he just slid in there and started making his own almanac, which is like one of the most famous books in the world now. So it's just interesting how some of all this stuff comes about. Let's see. He did make a better catheter. I think that's probably true, and we all are thankful for that. Because before he made his version of the catheter, it was just a tube, just a metal tube they were shoving up there, and so he kind of tried to make it a little more flexible with some hinge segments, and yeah, I'm not going to get too deep in that, but he did that. He's always famous for the lightning rod, which was actually really important during that time. If you think about it, there were a lot of churches that were getting struck by lightning because they were usually the tallest buildings in town. I even read about there's a town in Italy where the church got struck, and there was 3,000 like no, I'm sorry, what was it? There was like something like 1,000 pounds of like gunpowder in the basement. And so when it got struck, the whole building just exploded like a bomb, which, that's out there too somewhere. I mean, look it up. I'm not lying. But my question is, why is there that much gunpowder in the basement? I don't know. Another question, different podcast. But doing the lightning rod thing, he wanted to really control electricity, and he tried to, and I think succeeded in trying to stop a turkey's heart with electricity. But then he wanted to cook the whole turkey with the electricity, and that actually backfired on him. Literally, he was shocked and I think passed out. So this guy, Ben Franklin, is a hoot. And so before we get out of here, I'm just going to cover his family real fast and his death. I don't think there's that much more. Let me see here. Yeah, so I mean, he was throughout his life, he fathered at least 15 children, some illegitimate, some legitimate, just like his dad. He was, throwing that thing around. And he established a common law marriage with his common law wife, Deborah Reed. And this was because Deborah Reed had actually been married to a guy named John Rogers beforehand, but little did she know he was actually still married to another woman in England, right? So when that kind of whole thing, when that ball dropped, he hopped back on the next ship to England and went back and just disappeared. So now she's married to a guy who is not around and can't sign divorce papers, so she can't actually get remarried. So they're forced to do a common law marriage. That's just, that was explained to me after like the 5th documentary. So I just thought I'd lay that out there real fast for the people who might want to know. I don't know if there's much really to say. His family is not, to me, it's like the least interesting part of his whole life. I'm sorry if people who feel like their family is their whole life, but this guy seemed to have done a lot more than just, be around with his family. Let's see, his death. He died, like I said, at the age of 84 on April the 17th, 1790. He had what they call pleurisy, which is an infection in the lungs, I believe. I'm not, great in the medical field. Let's see if there's anything else I really want to share before we get out of here, because this is still bite-sized bios. I don't want to just throw this guy's whole bio at you. Oh yeah, there's one more. There's one more. This is actually interesting. He wrote an essay about farts, specifically trying to make them smell better, right? And so he's quoted as saying, "It is universally well known that in digesting our common food, there is created or produced in the bowels of human creatures a great quantity of wind." End quote. It's literally his words. Another quote: that the permitting of this air to escape and mix with the atmosphere is usually offensive to the company from the fetid smell that accompanies it. End quote. And so he literally wrote this letter to the Royal Academy of Brussels, urging them to undertake a study to find a drug that you can mix with food or sauces that, another quote, that shall render the natural discharges of wind from our bodies not only inoffensive but agreeable as perfumes. End quote. He literally, and so he didn't actually publish it, but he circulated it among his friends. And so it is out there, but it's just, so this guy was just a handful. Old Ben Franklin is just a handful. All right, that's been another episode of Bite Sized Bios. BSB. I hope everybody goes over to HDT Happen and continue to find out how things happen over on the website. Check out the transcripts and all the extra videos may be up there. Head on over to Apple Podcasts. Give us a like and subscribe if you can. If you can't, that's cool too. Just keep listening. I don't think there's much more to cover. Let's see. We'll see you guys in a couple days with another episode of HDTH.